The coaching carousel spinning around the NFL this week as we prepare for NFC and AFC championship games this weekend. Liam Coen turning down the Jags, McDaniel back in New England, and what's going on with the Dallas Cowboys? All that and more on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Love all the everydayers. Appreciate the new listeners as well. Make sure you subscribe. Please hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this podcast. Hang out with us every day here as we break down everything going on with the coaching cycle and playoff football. And, of course, NFL draft and off-season free agency. Tons more to get into. It's going to be a really fun off-season. So subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel. Make the NFL playoffs even more exciting right now on FanDuel because new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Huge win for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this morning. Huge win for the Jacksonville Jaguars this morning. And we're going to split up our mailbag into Wednesday and Thursday pods this week because we want to focus all on the coaching cycle on today's show. And we'll get more into some other ideas and things on tomorrow's episode before we make our final picks for championship weekend on Friday's episode here. And the news of the day is that Liam Coen, offensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, has turned down the Jacksonville Jaguars, taken his name out of it for the head coach job. He was thought 24 hours ago to be the leading candidate for the Jacksonville Jaguars and their head coach position. So Liam Coen now out. He's going to stay at least one more year as offensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And nobody's a bigger winner on this morning than I think Baker Mayfield, who's had going on, I think he was going to be going on his 10th offensive coordinator in the NFL. As a player, if Liam Coen left and got another job somewhere. So this is huge for them. And Liam Coen looked at, and we got some questions about the Jaguars here and Trent Baalke, and we're going to get to those. But from Liam Coen's perspective, he probably saw Ben Johnson being the belle of the ball. And if they put up another offensive season, he's going to be maybe the number one name on a lot of teams' lists and have his choice of jobs next offseason. And he saw that as a better opportunity than taking the Jacksonville Jaguars job now. And I guess it wasn't a guarantee that he was going to get that job. But Liam Coen staying with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, man.
I think this has a lot to do with Ben Johnson. I'm glad you brought that up because I think the Jags were probably number 2 on Johnson's list. You know, he chose the Bears over the Jags. And by all accounts and things that have come out since he's been hired by Chicago, quarterback was extremely important to Johnson. And not that he disliked Lawrence, but he really wanted to work with Caleb Williams. So the Jags finished second on that. Nothing worse than finishing second, you know. I mean, So then they pivot to Coen, and he probably looks at Johnson, as you mentioned, and said, man, if I go back to Tampa, we win the division. I got a really good offensive line. Baker continues to play well. I can be Johnson next year and have my pick of 6, 7, 8 jobs, whatever, open up, as opposed to forcing myself to take the Jags gig. And I wonder if that's going to be a trend, especially with these hot offensive-minded coaches, that I'm not just going to take the first job because it's one of 32 and I'm honored to have it. I'm going to take my job in a year, maybe later than they're begging for it. And I know people are going to ask about Baalke. I don't think that helps the Jags' ability to land these guys.
Yeah, question from Paul. How big of an obstacle is Trent Baalke to landing a top-tier head coach in Jacksonville? I do think it's somewhat of an obstacle. I think most big-time head coaches want to have control or have some say or really have a good idea about their GM and have a rapport. And, you know, we realized later after Ben Johnson got hired with the Chicago Bears that, oh, yeah, he's already got a history and he knows Ryan Poles. And so that's a massive thing. If you just have – and look, just some background on Trent Baalke too. This isn't like, oh, maybe he's put together a weird roster, or I don't know about him as a GM. In San Francisco, when he was GM, he took over from Scott McCloughan. Scott McCloughan stepped away. Baalke was the assistant GM. He jumped in, and that was after Scott McCloughan had, some historic drafts and brought in Aldon Smith and paired him with Justin Smith in free agency and drafted Patrick Willis and drafted, all these players and really put a team together. And Trent Baalke kind of inherited that and then let it kind of evaporate. But beyond just being a GM, and talking about drafting players with torn ACLs and thinking he gets a discount, and then they never end up playing well. And he saw what happened with Frank Gore, and I think he wanted to try to find his next Frank Gore, and it hasn't worked out as great for Trent Baalke in that regard. Loves arm length number one on his list of things, and that's why I was
look the part.
Say, yeah, he's going to draft Trayvon Walker over Hutchinson. People thought I was crazy when I said it very early in the process a few years ago, and he ended up doing it. He loves those traits and that length. They called him Coach Trent because this is not something the GMs do. And he would go down to the field and try to give pointers to players.
Yeah, that's frowned upon.
And he's not a coach. He's a GM. And I'm thinking in some cases, probably not even giving him the right coaching points. He's butted heads. There's been power struggles with him in the past. He's clearly done a good job of attaching himself to ownership and being able to create himself an opportunity to hire multiple head coaches. He's done that in multiple spots now. I don't think Trent Baalke's earned the right to be that, but whatever he does, he ends up doing it. And now he gets his third shot at deciding who the head coach is going to be. I think Urban Meyer might have, been less about Baalke and more about Urban Meyer saying, I want this job with this, young quarterback that we're going to get a chance to draft. But Baalke was there before he became GM. Remember, he's a holdover from a past regime as well, Trent Baalke. So he's been around there for a while and maybe had Shad Khan's ear. But I don't think it helps with Trent Baalke's resume. I'm sure that certain coaches are like, if I can't pick my guy, I'm not sure Baalke is my guy. So thanks, but we'll see who's hiring next year.
Yeah, and I don't have much more to add. I mean, I don't know that he's an awful GM. He certainly isn't an elite one or a great one. I mean, that's for sure. I mean, he doesn't have a wonderful track record. And you got to think, okay, let's say Lawrence gets hurt this year. We only win 2 games, and I'm on the hot seat as a year 1 coach. Well, this guy's probably safe, and I'm not. We've seen that over and over. And I was about to say, why are the Jags so married to this guy? It shocked me that when they made the coaching fire, well, we're going to keep Trent though, and I think you nailed it, that he's really good at attaching himself to ownership,
One more thing. This is, and I have the sound for it too. This was one of the most famous Trent Baalke moments when, and I can't remember, I think it was the introductory press conference for Jim Tomsula, who was one and done with the San Francisco 49ers when Trent Baalke was the GM. And this was a member of the media asked the coach what his plan was and what what kind of offense he was going to run and all of these things. And after Jim Tomsula's answer, Trent Baalke, the GM, who was not asked this question, butts in and says this.
Matt, I think somewhere in there, he said, we're going to run the football.
So basically he was like, let me tell you as GM what we're going to do offensively. And he kind of butted in, and it was like a classic thing. And he's got this like grumbly voice. He sounds like Super Dave Osborne for anybody who knows what his voice sounds like. And he butts in. He's like, what he's trying to say is we're going to run the football. And I think he's trying to be funny or whatever. But again, Coach Trent shows up, and this is the introductory press conference of a new head coach. And he answers the question for the new head coach. And so, yeah.
Stay in your lane.
Let's put it this way. Media, I don't know about the coaches or the front office, but media and fans don't think of Trent Baalke very highly over here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'm beginning to think that people are a little frustrated that he's still got the job in Jacksonville as well amongst that fan base. And I know that a certain podcaster here in the Locked On Podcast Network that covers the Jaguars feels that way as well.
Yeah, I'm going to have to talk to Wig about this on Friday a little bit, see stir the pot a little bit. But I bet he's not having a great time, to be honest with you.
So the 2 offensive names out, it was Ben Johnson, who was target number 1, Liam Coen, target number 2. The only other finalists that we know of right now, unless they're going to interview more people who are still in the playoffs right now, the only other finalist we know right now is Patrick Graham, formerly of the Raiders, and Robert Saleh, who was most recently head coach of the New York Jets. Those are the 2 names that have second interviews so far with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And so
I get the impression they wanted to go offense too.
Right. And so I would guess that of those names, I would think that resume wise, Robert Saleh is probably the most likely
I would think
coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars right now.
I mean, I'm just throwing this out there, but if I were them, I'd pivot to like a Mike McCarthy or, someone that's kind of like been around the block. I think Saleh would be fine, but I just want someone a little more offensive,
Well, they just did that too.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Doug Peterson wasn't the right guy. But, Mike McCarthy, Doug Peterson, similar.
Yeah, it's almost
brand,
potato. Right? Yeah, right.
You're like at the grocery store and you're like, what's the difference between these 2 shampoos? I have no idea. Like, I know both these brands, but look at this weird little organic thing though. Let's try this.
Shot, yeah.
This brand. This looks fancy. And so that's
my hair hasn't been going real well. Let's try something different, right?
All right. Speaking of McDaniel, speaking of McCarthy, what about the Dallas Cowboys? What are they doing now at head coach? We do have potentially some information there. And Josh McDaniel joining the New England Patriots again. Next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's $300 extra to play with and keep the action going at FanDuel. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate. The variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Tons of prop bets for championship weekend, for the big game in a couple of weeks. NFL draft props as well, which is my favorite way to play on FanDuel. And, of course, NBA, NHL, every sport imaginable. You can find all of that action at FanDuel. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com, join today, and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sports book partner of the NFL. I'm going to go to Parker, who says, who even are the options for Dallas at head coach? No one they have interviewed are interesting or would get me excited as a Cowboys fan. And, well, I think our latest inside information, potentially, Matt, might...
Yeah, some birdies talking here. Yeah, it might be a little bit. By the time you listen to this, might be final.
Right. And it might be a little disappointing to Parker and some other Cowboys fans around the world. And, look, Deion Sanders is one of the names. I don't know if Deion Sanders is an actual candidate or not. He kind of backtracked on the idea and tried to, reaffirm to some recruits that maybe he was actually staying at Colorado for another year, but did have that conversation, not an official interview though, with Cowboys ownership and Jerry Jones. But here are the names, and there's 4 completed interview names, and that's it. It's a short list of head coach interviews, the shortest list of head coach interviews in the NFL from open jobs. And those 4 names are Leslie Frazier, who's currently assistant head coach of the Seahawks, Eagles offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, former Jets head coach Robert Saleh, who's interviewed with just about everybody. I don't know if there's a second interview there yet with him, and Brian Schottenheimer, the current Cowboys offensive coordinator. And what are you hearing about that job, man?
The little tips I've been told are Kellen Moore was their first choice and he turned them down. And that doesn't bode well. It does not seem like a very attractive job. And to me, that just means I don't want to work with the Joneses or for the Joneses, really.
Been down that path and was like,
yeah, right. I've been in that building and it's not for me. And I think they're going to promote Schottenheimer. I mean, I think that's the scuttlebutt right now on Twitter and some people I've talked to that would know more than that maybe by the end of the day, that's going to be announced. And again, it's not super inspiring. I mean, it comes back to Jerry Jones's landman conversation. I want to work with people I know and like, and maybe that's not the best thing for winning football games, but he can do whatever he wants.
And that kind of goes along with what at first he's like, oh, Brian Schottenheimer, really? That's their choice, and they're just going to stay in-house.
Yeah.
And then you kind of follow the path. And by the way, there was a report earlier this week that the Dallas Cowboys were expecting Mike McCarthy to return and did not have a plan in place for the world they currently live in, where he turned down their offers and they couldn't come to a contract agreement, and he basically left in head coach free agency, which we almost never see in the NFL. And maybe that's why. And maybe they overrated what they thought they had there as far as leverage, and thinking, well, of course, we're just going to play this out and string him along. And then if we want him back, he'll come back for sure. And Mike McCarthy didn't come back. But apparently they liked the job that the coaching staff was doing enough, because the other part of it is that as far as I know, like, those coaches haven't been allowed. Like, Schottenheimer's not interviewing for other jobs.
No, I don't think so.
Mike Zimmer, the defense coordinator, I haven't seen him on lists of being interviewed for other jobs. So that means that they have not been let out of their contract, which tells me that, yeah, maybe there's something to this, that Jerry Jones likes the coaches he has in-house and might just stick with the same group and just elevate Brian Schottenheimer, and likes the way the offense is going. And is like, okay, cool, we're going to keep the same offense. And Brian Schottenheimer, you're now the head coach. And I think there's some legs to this. Yeah.
I imagine he has a good relationship with Dak Prescott. I mean, I hope so, but I don't know what kind of game day CEO leader men he is,
No idea.
It's not real exciting, but I'm not sure what names are, to be honest with you.
But those are the names, and there's not very many.
Yeah.
If Saleh gets the job and Kellen Moore turned him down, well, that leaves you with Schottenheimer and Frazier of the folks who have been interviewed. And who knows, maybe there's some other coaches that are still in the playoffs that they have not had a chance to interview yet. But it does sound like staying in-house is the way the Cowboys are leaning right now.
That seems like the word on the street. We'll see if that's official, but I get the feeling that they're real close on that. Meanwhile, teams like the Lions are getting pillaged left and right, and Dallas is just kind of bumping everybody up.
Absolutely. I mean, you brought up the Lions. It sounds like the Jets don't want to let Aaron Glenn have another interview with anybody.
Right.
That's still not a done deal yet. So Aaron Glenn might say, well,
seems close.
I still want to go to New Orleans and talk to the Saints, but maybe you could pay me even more than what you're offering. Okay. And so we'll see how that dance goes, but they might lose Aaron Glenn. And the thing is now the Lions have already lost one of the guys who could have been the replacement for Aaron Glenn as defensive coordinator in Detroit. Terrell Williams, who's somebody that a little bit about, is going to be the defensive coordinator now for the New England Patriots under Mike Vrabel. And the Patriots are bringing the gang back together on offense with Josh McDaniels coming back again to the New England Patriots to be Mike Vrabel's offensive coordinator.
Yeah, and it was many moons ago, and he was a young coach, but T-Dog was our defensive line coach at Akron when I was there. I mean, he was one of our hires. Whenever we went from Pitt to Akron, he was one of our hires, and he was phenomenal and was great to work with. And I've kind of been friends with him on Facebook. I don't talk to him all the time or anything like that, but I'm glad that he keeps moving up in the world. He's a really good dude. And he was in Tennessee before too. So I think there's a connection there as well. With Vrabel.
Congrats to T-Dog.
T-Dog, there you go.
T-Dog, Terrell Williams.
A lot of that D-line. I mean, yeah.
I don't know if that one's a done deal, but they're targeting.
Yeah, it sounds like it's real close too.
And right. I know Deshae Townsend, who's also on the defensive staff, is interviewed for DC of the San Francisco 49ers, one of only 3 names to interview there. And so I'm sure the Lions would like to figure out what's going on with Aaron Glenn so they can elevate one of those guys. And, so maybe Terrell Williams needing to see if he can stay as DC in Detroit. And if not, maybe go to New England. So some things to really figure out. And the latest on Aaron Glenn is the Jets' goal is to not let him leave. And the Saints is probably the other big one, and some connections there for Aaron Glenn with the New Orleans Saints. So it sounds like Aaron Glenn is going to get a job offer and going to be a head coach. So
yeah. Like, I don't have Schefter on speed dial or anything, but I get the feeling Schottenheimer and Glenn are going to get finalized here by the time we talk tomorrow. Sure feels that way. Just reading the tea leaves,
That's what's going on with the tea leaves right now with the coaching searches around the NFL. More mailbag, more talk about what's going on with the coaching searches as well around the NFL.
Yeah, Patriots almost sound like they're close to T-Dog, and they already got an OC. So, the Patriots are rounding out their coaching staff here pretty good.
Absolutely. We'll get to the rest of it. Yep. What it all means next. This episode of Peacock and Williamson brought to you by Talkspace. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, communicate more effectively, but finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge. And that's where Talkspace comes in. And with Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, they make it easy. Getting help the way you need it and make it accessible to you, make it affordable to you. That's what Talkspace is all about. With Talkspace, signing up is so simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours. So convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your own home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans. And for most insured members, there's $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health than it is now in 2025. So check out Talkspace. And as a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code SPACE80. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show as well. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code SPACE80. I find the coach hiring cycle kind of wild, Matt. And so, like the Jacksonville Jaguars, good example. They had someone they really wanted. They take another job. Okay. Candidate number 2, well, he goes and decides he doesn't want your job. And now there's like this gap, which seems like an eternity with how fast people can get hired and interviews happening left and right. You got to find your guy, and you don't want that guy. We're seeing this with the Jets and the Saints. You don't want that guy to go interview somewhere else and get a different job. And so it becomes a timing issue too. And unless you're really, really waiting for a coach that's still coaching in the playoffs and in one of these 4 remaining teams, if you're the Jaguars, you got to move quickly. And their appointment to interview Robert Saleh, I think, isn't until Friday. And we're sitting on Wednesday. That's a lot of hours that things could happen. A lot of
hours, right?
Maybe the 49ers could talk Robert Saleh into, being the highest paid defense coordinator in the NFL and be like, look, this isn't that good of a job anyway. You're going to get a better opportunity here in a year or two. Why don't you come be defensive coordinator, show everybody what kind of a coach you are here and get a better job. And nobody wants this Jaguars job anyway. And you left yourself some time. Maybe another team, maybe the Cowboys say, okay, we want to interview now Robert Saleh. And you're like, okay, now we got to move. And it happens.
I was thinking the Saints, like if they don't get Glenn, boom, I'm going to go Saleh now.
Right. Saleh's interviewed with the Raiders as well. We don't know what's going on with that job. Maybe the Raiders turn to Patrick Graham, who's getting some interest around the NFL. And so things have to move very quickly in this league. And it feels like waiting until Friday is an eternity for some of these teams too. And letting someone go interview somewhere else. And then you've got to build your staff. So if another team, maybe you wanted Terrell Williams, right? As your coordinator. But now the Patriots are way ahead of you because they're putting their staff together so they can offer someone a job before you can. You don't have your head coach, and then your head coach doesn't get his top assistants that he wants because the assistants are getting hired everywhere else around the league. So it's just a fascinating thing, and seeing all the dominoes fall and seeing how slow some teams are and not having the opportunity to get the guys they want because they wait too long. And then some teams move very quickly because they don't want to be stuck in that same situation.
Yeah, the whole we opened the week or last week talking about how goofy the whole situation, the whole process is to begin with. These guys' phones must be calling all the time. Like, oh, I know I can be the D-line coach for the Patriots, but man, I have a chance to be D coordinator at the Saints if this guy gets hired. But the only way he gets hired is if Glenn takes a job with the Jets, and all these dominoes and musical chairs, and who ends up with sitting not with the chair to sit in, and what team frankly has to settle for a head coach that they really don't want. I mean, that's the crazy part is the head jobs. Even though there's only 32 of them and only 8 of them opened up, which is a lot, of course, there's going to be teams that are settling for a head coach, it seems like, Raiders, Saints, Jags,
And even the coordinator thing. So we saw this with the 49ers because they were in the playoffs, deep in the playoffs, championship game, Super Bowl for multiple years in a row. And they lost their defensive coordinator to a head coach job in D'Amico Ryans and then had to wait to even start talking to coordinators until after they were done with the playoffs. And, they didn't like the group of candidates. And so they went one and done with Steve Wilkes. Well, then they went to the Super Bowl and they did the same thing. And they're like, well, I guess we'll just elevate somebody on the staff then, because they didn't like the group of candidates. And then that went one and done for them at defense coordinator. And Kyle Shanahan basically said, well, we like the group of defense coordinators that are available to us. So that's why we fired our DC. We're going to get a better one this offseason, essentially. He didn't say those words, but paraphrasing, that's the thought.
Figuring it out, yeah.
And they didn't interview anybody. They interviewed Robert Saleh and one of their own guys, and Deshae Townsend, and that's it. They didn't interview like Lou Anarumo and Dennis Allen and all these other names. So I'm like, well, what are you guys doing? You're putting a lot of eggs into one basket, and now Robert Saleh might get that head coach job at the Jacksonville Jaguars, and then where are you at again? And so now you're elevating another in-house guy.
I'm sure you brought this up on Locked on Niners, but I imagine Shanahan's thinking, Robert, I'm hoping for you, but I don't think you're going to get one this go round. You got a nice soft landing spot here, but
right. And like Liam Coen, part of him saying no to the Jags is also getting a new deal and being the highest paid offensive coordinator in the NFL.
That's
Tampa Bay Bucks. That's kind of your thing. It's like, well, I could be the highest paid defensive coordinator, or I could get a job that maybe isn't the greatest job. I still think the Jacksonville Jaguars job is okay as long as you can make it work with Trent Baalke and as long as you're a good coach. And then, who's your offensive coordinator going to be? And those guys are going to get snatched up by other teams as well. And so you got to move quickly in this game. It's fascinating.
And these four teams remaining are interesting, and they definitely have some candidates, but not like the Lions guys, like
maybe Kellen Moore. Maybe that's Kellen Moore's thing is he's like, well, I want to go to the Jaguars rather than the Cowboys. Or maybe he's just saying, nope, I want to be OC forever. I don't know if that's the case necessarily.
I think you and I talked about this on Monday, but even like Kingsbury, Brady and Kingsbury were together with the Patriots. I mean, he was drafted as a backup, obviously, to Tom. But, Brady on the air was talking about how Kingsbury's loving just drawing up plays and calling plays and, working with Jaden Daniels. Why do I want to leave this gig,
Yes, and much less stress, I'm sure, for a coordinator. And when it's a stable job, you probably like that situation until the perfect thing opens up for you, especially if you're in a situation that was weird and was not great for you as a head coach. And by the way, when you find a good head coach, what do? Well, you give him a new contract, which is what Kevin O'Connell, still only 39 years old. He's got a new multi-year contract extension. And according to Tom Pelissero, Vikings GM Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is up next to get a long-term extension. So GM head coach, they got it figured out, they think, in Minnesota, and those guys are going to be around for a long time.
Yeah, and I think both have done a tremendous job. O'Connell, to me, is one of the top couple coaches in the league. I would love to hire him. He could be my guy anytime. But just to show how volatile this world is, as good as both those dudes have looked in the Vikings organization, O'Connell's 0-2 in the playoffs. And if they pivot to McCarthy and it doesn't work and they miss the playoffs, or he ends up 0-3 and gets bounced, all of a sudden your seat's hot again. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying that's how this league works. And it's brutal.
It's brutal. Happens very quickly around the NFL. So I don't know what the Raiders are doing. I don't know what the Saints are doing. It's just kind of a waiting game for a lot of these teams.
And I don't think any of their fans are going to be doing jumping jacks with the final result.
Well, yeah, the hottest names are off the list. And again, there might be, I think some of the teams that are waiting and there's not a lot of urgency, I think they know something about maybe some of the candidates that are still in the playoffs, or at least want to talk to those candidates.
Maybe Brady with the Bills.
Yeah, Joe Brady is potentially a hot name. Kellen Moore. I think Steve Spagnuolo would be an interesting head coach candidate potentially somewhere. If I'm the Raiders, Pete Carroll has been one of the people they've talked to. They talked to Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn.
Actually, glad you brought that up, because Birdie told me that's probably going to happen too. The Pete Carroll to the Raiders is a really good possibility. And I was blown away by that, but
I was surprised to see him interviewing. I thought he was going to be sipping pina coladas on a beach somewhere, but he's still got that passion.
I think he's younger than Belichick
by like a year.
Yeah, I mean,
they're both 70. I mean, I can't imagine starting a new career that is that all-consuming at the age of 70.
I'm glad you brought his name up, though, because I think there is a good chance, or a reasonable chance, he's the Raiders head coach.
One more name of a coach that was recently ousted from the playoffs. Todd Monken, he was like a hot name for the first interviews, but I haven't heard his name since.
And he's one I'd be really excited about. Right.
So
like,
the Ravens,
if I were the Jags, I'd pivot to Monken.
Yeah, but as far as I know, and maybe who knows, maybe some teams will circle back now. If you're looking for an offensive coach and you got turned down by a couple of guys, maybe Monken comes back and is one of those options for the Jacksonville Jaguars. But he's on the list as well for
That's a good name, yeah,
the Raiders. But Steve Spagnuolo is another coach who's still coaching that has been scheduled to interview, and I don't know if that interview has taken place. So maybe they did a Zoom interview that first week, or maybe they're waiting until he's done. So Raiders, I wonder if somebody still coaching might be on the list for them, and Pete Carroll might be a backup option for them.
Maybe. But don't discount Carroll to the Raiders, though, folks. I think there's a chance that happens.
All right, there you go. That's the breakdown of what's going on right now in the NFL with the coaching interviews. Cliff Kingsbury is on the list along with Aaron Glenn for the New Orleans Saints potentially, and so we'll see what happens there. Kellen Moore has actually completed a first interview with the Saints as well. Would Kellen, and Mike McCarthy is also interviewed, I believe, with the New Orleans Saints. Could Kellen Moore say no to the Cowboys but yes to a team like the Saints or the Jaguars potentially?
I don't think that's crazy.
It feels crazy just because of the brand that the Cowboys are.
Right.
That's not the job that the brand would make you think it is.
He just doesn't want to work for the Cowboys.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah, I don't know.
Let us know what you think. We got more questions in the hopper for tomorrow's episode. Kind of split the mailbag up into coach and non-coach specific questions here. And we're going to take a look at the NFC and AFC championship games, make our picks for that as well. So get the questions in at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL. Drop a question in the YouTube comments. Subscribe while you're there. Matt and I back tomorrow right here. Peacock and Williamson.